All right, so I'm gonna mute myself, and
Sure.
Richard, whatever you need, sir. If you need to share your screen, you should have the ability to do that. Tell us a little bit about who you are so they can make sure to contact you if they need any appraiser services, and
Sounds good.
go from there, my man.
All right, sounds good. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Richard Alonzo. I'm a certified real estate appraiser. I've been appraising since 2008. Certified means that I'm allowed to appraise properties regardless of dollar amount, but it's specific to single family residences, multifamilies, and I'm also on the FHA board. So if you have any questions related to any of those things, feel free to ask. So like Robert said, he mentioned that you guys were having questions in regards to what contributes to value. I think we mostly have a good sense of that. Some of this is subjective, and the key is that even when you get an appraisal, it doesn't tell you this is the value. It tells you this is the opinion of value. And the opinion of value is based on the appraiser who went out there and his experience. There's no formula that's going to get you specifically down to a value. And that's what makes the questions he's asking in regards to what contributes, how much do I add for this? It's a very difficult question to answer because there's no actual number that will work. You can't say, oh, it should be this, because the appraiser could always kind of counter. And us as appraisers, we're somewhat lone wolves. We don't really work for these large offices. We're mostly independent. So there's a lot of inconsistency, and that's what makes it a little complicated also. So I know that's probably something you guys encounter. But I'm gonna tell you the main things. The main things are obviously the size of the home. The size of the lot is a big one that plays in, the bedroom bathroom count. But appraisals are, properties are rated in different levels, and that starts between C1 and C6. So a C1 home, for example, is brand new construction with the caveat of not previously occupied. That is what's considered a C1 home. It goes all the way down to C6, which is a home which is basically a tear down. It's a home that maybe has too much fire damage to be rehabable, or it's just falling apart. C5 is a step up from that, which can probably be salvaged, but it's going to cost a lot of money to fix. Above that is C4, which is typically an older home, which has maybe not been updated, but still fine, still has a good effective light. Above that is C3, and C3 and C4 are what a majority of the properties that we tend to deal in are. C3 is an older home that's been updated, maybe made a little more modern, newer windows, newer kitchen, newer bath, newer windows, things like that. It's a home that's been updated, an older home that's been updated. And that's C3 and C4 is where a majority of our market is. C2 is a newer home. So it could be even a brand new home that, for example, maybe they use at the sales office. It no longer has that caveat of not previously occupied. So the majority of our homes fall into that rating system. Okay, and it's important that you know that every time an appraiser rates a property between C1 and C6 on an appraisal, that's uploaded to Fannie Mae. And what will happen is that they've been, over the years, been trying to create an algorithm that will check our work independently on every appraisal. So if they see that a majority of appraisers are rating a home one way and you rate a home a different way, they'll come in on the back end and ask you questions as to why was this home rated so much differently than your peers. It's a peer model algorithm that they've been working on for a while. And that's why you see a lot of appraisal waivers that have been up in the market in the last few years and things like that. So I'm telling you basically how to rate a home. C3 and C4 is a big deal. It's a big deal. It's one of the things that's going to give value, and that's the condition of the home. So like I said, most of them are C3, C4. That's the other things that will tend to give value. You got pools, lot sizes, and those two things became more apparent in value in the last couple of years since COVID. Since people started staying home more, people wanted the larger lots and they wanted the pools. So things like that, which typically in the past always gave value, seem to be giving more value than they used to, at least in my experience. I don't know how to approach you guys too much with what specifically you want because there is so little specifics. So if you guys have questions, throw them at me. What if, I tend to, as an appraiser, we want to hit value as much as possible. And I've said it before, the reason being is that you guys are all lovely. But nobody ever calls me and tells me thank you when I hit a value. It just doesn't happen. I don't expect you to. But if I don't hit a value, everybody calls. And so we obviously want to minimize all that on the back end. We're in the same situation. We all just want to close the deal and move on. I mean, it's just the way it is. So we prefer to hit value than not hit value. We will encounter those situations where you just can't make it work. And those things are typically come back to, I'll give you an example of 2 values I missed recently. And just to kind of get you thinking of how I had to approach it. Sometimes you'll miss a value because there's no comps. And other times you'll miss a value because the comps are just too good. And what I mean by that is I have an example of a home that I just recently did. I believe it was in Montebello. There was 3 comparable properties right down the street that sold within the last 2 months. And they sold for around $860. We're in escrow at $910, and we're back in a freeway. Exact same condition, exact same square footage, built the same time, within a couple blocks of each other. I can't ignore those. I don't have an option to ignore them. The reason I can't ignore them is because even if I submit the appraisal and it gets through, when they upload it later, it's going to get flagged that I missed these obvious comparables. And when that happens, I have to account for that. And if I don't have a reasonable answer, it's going to hit the value pretty big. So a lot of appraising you have to keep in mind is the audience for the appraisal is the underwriter. It's not the listing agent or the selling agent. It's the underwriter. They're the audience for the appraisal. And a lot of appraisals are written towards them. And I have to know where they're going to hit, where they're going to push back on me, and where they're not going to push back on me. So there's a lot of unwritten rules to appraising. It is very subjective. But those are the big things. On page 1 of the appraisal specifically asks, when was the bathroom and kitchen last updated? Those are the main questions. Those are some of the big indicators. They want to see when those were updated because those still sell homes. But yeah, there's quite a few different scenarios, but what questions do you guys have? What can I specifically help answer for any of you?
I got a question.
Sure.
So as a listing agent, when we meet you at the home, what would you like, if anything, us to give to you? I know you probably already have the comps. I usually provide like unique features or the age of upgrades and that kind of thing.
Sure.
What would you like?
That's all helpful. I mean, that's all helpful. At least I can see that you've done a little bit of homework. What tends to happen sometimes is, if you're going to bring me comps, bring comps that have been thought through. A lot of times what I'll get is people will do a mile radius search and sort from top to bottom and just pick the top 3 because they're the top 3. And those aren't necessarily comparable to us, but they just figure, hey, this is what it is. But I'm always open to taking comparables. I know that's, for some appraisers, they seem to have a problem with that. I never understood that, but I'm always open to that. Yeah, you feel free. List of updates is always good. That way it's something that I have in the past. If it's a good list of updates, I'll put that in the appraisal sometimes and point to, hey, look, this is a dollar amount. These are the updates that they put in the home. Maybe it's not necessarily apparent in the photos, but these are things that they have given to the home that contribute to the value. And I will definitely do that. But yeah, feel free. Comps, a list of updates is always good.
You like the age of the upgrades, 2 years forwards, that kind of thing?
The reason the list of updates, the age of the updates is important is because on page 1 of the appraisal, it specifically asks the time range of the upgrades. And they're specifically looking at the kitchen and the bathrooms. They want to know Was this done in the last year, last 5 years, last 10 years, or last
Okay.
15 years? So yeah, absolutely. That's something that would be definitely helpful if you felt free to do that. Yeah.
Do you typically find that appraisals come in a little bit on the conservative side because the banks don't want to have any chance of over-financing a house or a property?
I'm going to tell you no. And we don't necessarily try to be, like I was saying earlier, we really don't want to misvalue, but this also plays back to, I'm working towards the underwriter. Okay. I have to know in a sense what they're looking for. It's not that we try to be conservative, but there is an inherent problem between an appraisal and a listing agent. The problem is that we have to look, we base our values off of sales that are in the past. And you guys are typically listing your homes based on expected values of the future. That little gap can account for a lot. And there's a lot of times I just can't account for that. You know, especially specifically over this last year, this market's been weird. You know, this has been the flattest market I've seen since maybe 2012. I don't remember the market being this flat. If I'm going to try to say the market's increasing and I'm going to put time adjustments for that gap, I have to have solid data showing that there's an increase, a measurable increase that's been consistent over the last 4 quarters. So that's where we get in a little bit of a problem right there. It's that time period. And that actually goes to the reason why I personally don't recommend agents to get an appraisal up front on a property before they list it. Because that time between when you get it, that's already comparables that were done, you know, before the time period goes out there. And now you got the listing, and then it goes into escrow. And then that's another 2 to 3 months. And things change. Things change. The market's always in flux. The way I look at an appraisal when I'm looking for comps, the way I was taught is recency, proximity, similarity. The recent sale, something close by, and how similar, because you can adjust for that type of stuff. But the more recent, the more important, because that's a better snapshot of the market as it sits today. So to your original question, do they come in conservative because they're scared the bank won't fund? Not necessarily. We have to know our audience. I know certain lenders are much more conservative than others. And I know some who I've never got a condition from. So it depends on who I'm working for. And that's hard to explain because that's something you guys will never see on your site. You guys don't know who's conservative and who's not. And a lot of times it's just the way it's the back end stuff that we're trying to avoid. You don't want to come in at value and then have them sit on the appraisal for a week. You guys have already passed your appraisal contingencies. And then they come back with all these conditions on the back end, or they run it through that UCDP system and the appraisal's flagged. Then the value falls apart. So you're not necessarily trying to be conservative as much as you know that you have to get it through the underwriting part. And so it's not us necessarily being consistent or conservative as much as is knowing what's going to be looked at. Does that answer you pretty much?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
I have a question.
Feel free.
So I was talking to a potential seller, and all the houses were similar square footage, but she kept talking about how she has a pool house and a she shed and this built-in barbecue and all these other, things.
Yeah.
Her house, it actually was an expired listing, and the price was like within the range of the comps, and it didn't sell. But in her mind, she thinks it has a lot of value because of those additional things on the property. She has a few acres. It's a nice, big house. But how do I guess even handle that conversation? And if I were to list it, would you go outside of like the comps because they have additional structures on the land?
An additional structure, I would, especially if it's permitted. If it's not permitted, you're going to have a problem. The she shed, that's kind of open to interpretation. Is that personal property? Is it on Is it on some type of, some of those sheds, those tough sheds, which the she sheds are usually what they are. It's a tough shed that's been converted and, and they.
Oh, yeah. I think it's a structure. I think it has
Yeah.
power. It was like a craft room.
Yeah,
so-
yeah, I've got you. That would give value, especially if it's permitted. It's something that I would definitely see giving value. And for that, you do have to go out. You do have to expand your search. You're not necessarily going to find it. You're in the gray area with that though, because I can't give you I can't give you an easy answer of how much value is it going to give, because to find a property that has the same type of upgrades that you have, especially when you have acreage, because the acreage is going to play so much into the value as it is. So how do you extract that? And the correct answer is paired sales analysis. You get two comps that are similar, which has a similar upgrade and which one doesn't, and what's the difference in value. That's the correct answer. But real world application of that is very difficult to do. I would say a pool house, maybe 5% of, something like that. But you get it kind of into gray area, but I could see that making sense. A lot of appraisers don't like to give more than 10% of a adjustment for what I call a line item. And a line item would be, for example, a pool, upgrades, any type of single line item, more than 10%. And the reason being is back in the day, a lot of appraisers have been doing this a long time, knew immediately if you had a 10% a line item adjustment, you would immediately be flagged. And the appraisal would, it was just a huge problem with appraisals. So now they've shied away from that, but there's still a lot of appraisers who have that mindset, and they stay away from giving too much value for a single line item adjustment. That could be lot sizes, things like that. But there's value in what you're discussing, but it's a hard one to place. It's going to be hard to put it up front in your listing. I think the best way would be to let an appraiser handle it on the back end. What's somebody willing to pay for it? But yeah, you're really in the gray with that question. But you have to find something that's comparable, and you're going to have a problem because the acreage is what makes it a little bit difficult. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for you on that, but it's a good question. There's no solid answer for that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
When you have like 2 or 4 acres and they start building structures on their land, does the bank see that as a value or not too? Or is it just a house?
I'll give you an example of one I did just a couple of weeks ago, and this was if you're gonna give it value, make sure you at least have found a sale that is maybe sold for a little bit more than the rest. If you can find a sale that has that, so you can hand that to the appraiser. I don't care how far you have to go. If you have to go and I'm assuming if you have acreage, you're a little more rural. But if you have to go maybe 4 miles and back 12 months and maybe up to 40% difference in the GLA, the gross living area, to find something that has something comparable, I would give that to an appraiser. Just say, hey, this is a comp that I found and it's got the same updates as me. I understand it's further, I understand it's bigger, but this is the only thing in our market. We're going to have to point to something. With that, you have to expand out. There's just no way around it. So yeah, you could absolutely, definitely do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
A quick question for you. When we're going out on appointments, we're preparing CMAs. I'm just curious your take on this. If a property is in an area where there's say it was built in 1980 and it's right on the outskirts of a completely brand new community or something like that, they've got no recent sales that could be considered comparable. Would you rather us go farther out, more recent, to find comparable sales, or would you rather us go further back within a smaller radius? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. I said earlier that recency is more important to me, in my opinion. Now I did the appraisal I did this morning was the opposite of that. I did an appraisal. I'm here in Southern California in San Gabriel Valley, in Monterey Park, an area where the homes were all built in the 40s and 50s, and I did a comp that was built in 2000, which is, they're there, but they don't come to the market very often. A majority of them are built much older. So you do have to bracket that. And by bracket that, I mean, you have to find a home that's at least similar in age. You can't have all the homes that are built in 2015 as comps, because you're going to have what's known as across the board adjustments. Every property is going to adjust down, and the bank wants to see at least something adjusting up. So in that case, it's a little tricky. You could go either way. You could go recent and go far, you know, and I would do whatever one makes more sense. Since the market has been relatively stable over the last 12 months, you know, if you went back 12 months and out a mile and a half, 2 miles, depending on the area, you know, this is, I'm more in a suburban area, so that would make sense to me. But it wouldn't be, you know, it's, you just need to have one. You have to have just one to throw in there. The rest you can adjust down.
Okay.
But if you have one, you're fine.
Okay.
But yeah, do both and find what works best. And that should be good enough. Either way, like I said, recency is paramount in my opinion.
Okay.
But recency and then proximity would be the second way, the further out.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
And Richard, this is Gabriela.
Hi, Gabriela.
Question. Hi, how you doing?
Good, thank you.
Solar. Let's talk about solar. We know we have a different systems, like you own the solar per you know, with different ways that it doesn't.
I lost you there.
Oh,
There you are.
sorry.
No, you're fine.
There. Okay. I was asking about the solar.
Solar, yeah.
How, which systems they add value to the property, and how can we estimate the value that will be into the property?
Solar is it's another hard one because there's so many different forms of ownership, and what makes it difficult is you really have to read the MLS on every listing, because sometimes some of the listing agents are very vague as to what type of ownership they have on that solar. You'll see solar paid in full, and then you'll read in the notes at the bottom, solar lease is paid for the year or whatever, you know. And that's where it gets very tricky, because you don't know exactly what the ownership tile is. Now, FHA, for example, will only, and Fannie Mae will only allow you to give value if it's owned, fully owned, not financed, but owned. And so those are the only ones. Now, the tricky part is finding a comparable that is the same way, because like I said, you know, MLS it's a combination of two things. MLS doesn't necessarily have a way to put solar's fully owned, and then the listing agents, some listing agents dance around that, you know, they dance around that question. And so you really have to go into it specifically one by one sometimes, and that's where it's really complicated to figure out what it is. So solar doesn't have much consistency for those two factors. It's hard for me to determine. And then you also have those homes where they're just trying to meet the bare minimum of solar to say they have it, which is maybe 6 panels that doesn't do anything. And you have those other homes that have a whole field in the backyard of, you know, 15, 20 panels. There's no consistency to it. I would say a good starting point, if the solar is owned, it goes back to, maybe, it depends. Our markets are drastically different. You know, 3% for a functional solar system that tends to work is more or less fair, I would think, in some markets. In other markets, you know, a lot of these new construction, like I said, they're just trying to satisfy a check on a page to say they have solar, and it doesn't make it really has no contributory value, or very little, sometimes $5,000, $10,000. So your question's very unique, or not unique, but it's very complicated to answer because the situation is so unique. I had one guy, I did his property, and he invested $150,000 in solar panels. And I mean, I'd never seen so many solar panels. And we had to sit down and go through it and try to create an equation to how much energy was offset to come up with a value. But that was so, it was beyond what's typical for the market. So the easy answer is 10 to 20,000. if it's functional and owned. That's the easy answer. But there's a lot of contributing factors that play into that. And that's one of those case-by-case basis. It kind of goes back to the she shed and the pool house and the barbecue. You know, you're going to have to do your research to find something. And I know these aren't answers that you like because it's not a, hey, this is this. It's just, it's a unique enough question. And with, that's just multifaceted. So I couldn't tell you. But if you started between 10,000 and all the way maybe up to 3% would be fair. And it's something that would most likely be seen as reasonable by any appraiser if the market, you know, can bear it. So yeah. Good question.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, good question.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's we see most and most often now this kind of situation, and I have in the past I saw that the property they got the solar, you know, as a brand new construction, and it was added as an upgrade to the house. That
Yeah.
you changed the bathroom, so it was really hard for me to find information about the solar and how to value that solar. You know.
With newer construction also, like I said, newer construction, they'll typically just put enough solar panels just to say there's solar up there. It doesn't really offset much of the electricity. I've seen that. And in some cases, with newer construction, you can see it as a line item, the builder's adding. It's a builder option that maybe adds $15,000 up front that they're financing more. When it's new construction, I would use that number. You know, whatever it is they paid, if it's new construction, I would apply that. You know, so if they paid an additional $15,000, that makes sense to me, but it's typically not much more than that when it's new construction. So I would apply that number on newer construction just because that makes the most sense. That's what they paid for it, and it's still new.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So Richard, does the bank view a property with a structure, no matter what condition it's in, much more valuable than just an empty lot because it could potentially bring in income with rent?
Well, now you're talking about something different. You're talking about highest and best use of a property in a sense. So an empty lot, you know, what's the intended use? We don't get a lot in my area of land appraisals just because there's so little land here in Southern California. The financing is totally different, and I'm not the right guy to answer that question. But a structure, when you say a structure, I mean a home. Yeah, I've mentioned a couple of times I did an appraisal recently here. Are you in Southern California also?
Yes, Marietta.
Okay. Oh, very okay, perfect. So Chino, I did a property in Chino just about a month ago. This property was a horse property. It had 2.4 acres. Okay, that's very rare that they come to market in Chino. It had a home on it, and it was in escrow, I think, for somewhere near $2 million. There was no comparables that justified that value. And I reached out to the listing agent. I reached out to the sales agent. I let them know up front, look, you guys have to help me out. I, as an appraiser, I don't have a secret book of comps that you guys don't have access to. We all look at the same numbers. It's how can I justify this based on the numbers we're all looking at? So I requested something. I requested information from the listing agent. What'd you base this off of? And she provided me this CMA. This, you know, there's a lot of companies that do these CMAs nowadays. Some of them it made no sense. And all the comps she gave me were 1.1 million. And she gave me two sales that were essentially mansions in Chino Hills. And I can't use that. But going back to your question of is there value, I had to research it further because that came into play. Is the land worth that much? So what you can do in that question is search for land listings. And I happened to find one that was comparable in size, and it was the same type of property. The house was on there that had been removed. It was zoned the same, and the property was selling, I believe, for $900,000 for the same size lot. So they were in escrow for $2 million. I don't remember what the value was. It wasn't near $2 million, but yeah, how a lot with the structure on it is typically viewed as more, at least it's financeable easier because you can finance it as single family. And that typically contributes to the value, the fact that it's financeable, you know. So yeah, I would say that a lot with the structure, because demolition isn't that much nowadays anyway, you know. I mean, it's expensive, but it's not in relation to building a new home. So yeah.
Thank you.
So Richard, in
So,
that case, that
Richard,
you,
a question came in the chat
Sure.
box. How accurate is the estimate on the RPR or on the realist tax report?
You know, those, I don't look at them enough to tell you. I can tell you that when I do look at them, you know, yeah, the realist tax report is like an AVM basically, right? So there's a lot of factors that they don't take into account. They can be, in certain scenarios, it can be pretty good. You know, if there's a lot of sales and the house has no, if it's an updated home and it's in a market where there's reasonable sales that have sold, they can be fairly accurate. You know, they're sometimes a little lower, I've noticed. But then you have situations, see, some of the, you know, for years we've heard appraisers are going away, and it's possible, I guess, now that they've got all these algorithms. But I look at the, you know, Zillow and Open Door both tried putting their money where their mouth was a couple years ago. You know, they started buying up all these homes and flipping them basing their values off of their algorithm. And frankly, I mean, they had their asses handed to them in many situations. They just lost so much money because the algorithms don't take things into account. You know, if you're in LA and there's a homeless encampment next to you, it's not going to see that. If there's railroad tracks behind you, it's typically not going to account for that. If there's a cemetery across the street, you know, things like that aren't necessarily taken into account. If your house is highly upgraded, it's not going to know that either. It's just basically an algorithm that's looking at, you know, dollars and square footage. And that's something that a lot of agents kind of come to me with is, well, the price per square foot of homes in the area is X. Therefore, my property value should be X. The problem with price per square foot is a lot of the biggest contributing factors to value have nothing to do with the square footage. Upgrades, pools, lot sizes, views. These are all things that are not reflected in the price per square foot. And so a lot of times when you get somebody who comes in and they'll do the search from highest to lowest and find what the highest price per square foot is, and then you try to apply it to your property, but you don't have the view, you don't have the upgrades, you don't have the lot size, you don't have the pool, you're just gonna miss it. So so back to the question, how accurate is it? If you're in a 1,200 square foot home in La Puente with a lot of sales, and they're all about the same size, it can be pretty accurate. It can be pretty accurate. But if you're in Covina Hills on a 3,000 square foot home with an acre and a half and a great view, you're going to be off pretty good. So yeah. I just happen to look here also on the notes, a value for a pool. I mentioned earlier, a pool is something that since COVID is, I see to be given more value than they used to be. That's a wild one, because you can go in some area, you know, back to the same thing. It's some factors where, you know, you have a pool with a rock slide and, you know, built-in barbecue or whatever. And that's a really nice looking pool. And then you got some little pools that are just basically glorified spas. You know, they vary in contribution pretty widely. But, you know, I would say, depending on the area you're in, you know, between 20 and 50,000. It just depends on the market you're in specifically. It's a big one, but that's kind of easy in a sense to isolate, because you'll find a home that's pretty comparable to your listing with a pool. And you'll find a home that's pretty comparable to your listing without a pool. You can usually extract the value out of those two to tell you more or less what the value is in your market. And that's great information to give to an appraiser if you have it. Anybody else?
So I actually have another question.
Sure.
Sometimes let's say a home is not selling, we might suggest to a seller to get an outside appraisal, to look at the value. If we got an outside appraisal, and how are those pretty close when you do an outside appraisal versus when you get an appraisal under escrow with a contract and a bank? Are the values going to be pretty similar, or do you find it's kind of hit or miss?
That's kind of it's a tricky question, because as appraisers, we're supposed to have these blinders in a sense. We're supposed to kind of have it fair. I will tell you though that when there's a purchase price involved, there's a goal in a sense,
Right?
As opposed to a refi, for example, where we're not given a goal. We just have to kind of figure out what's the highest the property will properly sell for. So it's kind of an open-ended question when you're handed an appraisal with a value, contract price, versus an appraisal without a value, which is what is the house worth? In my opinion, the house with a contract price is probably gonna come in higher. And I don't really have, I don't want to say you work harder for it, but you now have someone who the bank is deemed credible saying this is what they're willing to pay for a property. And isn't that the basis of what the value of something is? What is somebody willing to pay for it? So when you have that question in there, I, as an appraiser, do what I can to come in as high as I can justifiably come in on a property. And I try to be consistent with that. But if you're trying to come with what should I list it at, or maybe this list price I have it at is too high, I don't know. And the reason, the other problem behind that is that you don't know who the appraiser is going to be that goes out there behind you. We have no way of knowing who's going to be assigned to the appraisal. So am I more liberal on value than the next guy is going to be? And I don't know the answer to that. And so it's a very difficult question. But I would think you'd be within the game, within the ballpark. And at least if you had an appraisal done for that purpose, and you could show it to the appraiser, hey, look, I just had this property value. This is what the other guy came in at. And he can look at the logic. And if that makes sense to him, most likely he'll use it. But the difference between the two appraisals is one is going to be for personal use and isn't going to go through underwriting. The second one is. And so the appraiser who's doing it on the back end is going to be very aware of that. What argument can I extract from this appraisal that I can use that an underwriter will buy? So you can do it, but you might have a problem on the back end because you don't know which appraiser is going to go later.
I have a question.
Sure.
Thank you. I'm trying to do comps on a condo that does not have a garage, and all the condo complexes in the neighborhood or even outside all have garages, at least a one-car garage. So can I use a comp that has a one, compared to one car, or what would
look, a typical appraisal is going to have 6 comps anyway. So you're going to definitely have comps that have garages because comps without garages don't exist. I'm assuming, is this a 1-bedroom property?
1 bedroom and a loft?
Yeah, it's a 1-bedroom and a loft.
Oh.
Yeah, that makes sense why it has no garage. Those are typically the ones that wouldn't. What you want to look for specifically is 1-bedroom comparables, which is because 1-bedroom is marketable to someone specific. It's not marketable to a family with kids. It's just, that's what a 1-bedroom is. So the main thing you want to look for is the 1-bedroom comps. If you do find something, and those will be the ones most likely that don't have the garages, is the one with 1 bedrooms. That's how I knew what you had right away. So that would be your key when you're looking for a comp that has no garage. Now, an appraiser could look at that it's basically functional obsolescence. It's obsolescence on a property that it has, it's in an area where everyone has garages and you don't have a garage. And you might be able to adjust for it a different way. What city is it located in?
Huntington Beach.
Okay, so then you have a problem with parking already. most likely. So yeah, you know, you're gonna have, there's gonna be value attributed to that garage. And depending on how bad parking is in the area, I mean, that could be a big deal. You know, if you're gonna have to circle around your home every night you get back for 30 minutes to find somewhere to park, that's a problem. And that is obsolescence in a sense. So ideally you do want to find one. In your case, depending on how big the complex is, your best comp would probably be going back in time, going back 12 months, maybe even 18 months to find another 1-bedroom in the complex that is sold without a garage. And then, you know, maybe apply some type of time adjustment. If the market's been flat, well, it's still a good comp. If the market's increased or decreased, you could put some type of time adjustment. But that would ideally be the best comp, a 1-bedroom property in your same complex without a garage, because it's the same market, it's the same time. That would be the best comp if you could find it. And an appraiser can put time adjustments on it one way or the other, depending on how the market's gone. But that's tricky. If you can't find one further out, find one there and go back further in time.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Let's see.
Very good. Other questions as we get closer to wrapping up here?
No.
I
Okay,
ask a question, even if it's not my market?
Sure, feel free.
depends on what the question
No, I
is.
don't know if
Gonzalo.
you touched on it before. How do you handle landscaping from an appraisal?
Landscaping is a tricky one because, see, landscaping in some cases can have, can be, you know, it might be well maintained by someone, and then another person will come in and it's not maintained. And then so basically, what's the life expectancy of the landscaping? And it's, in a sense, it's not a fixed asset. You know, if you have a bunch of beautiful roses and I give them value, but then you go and pull the roses out, that value is no longer there. So landscaping is more of a, I'm sorry? Okay. Landscaping is more of, that's one of those that kind of goes into, this is for the homeowner's personal taste. You know, landscaping is very complicated because, like I said, it can go away very quickly, especially in the area you are, if you can't water it properly. And then the value for that goes away. It's not like a portion of a home or a swimming pool, which is installed. You know, it's a permanent structure. Landscaping doesn't have the permanence to it. So I typically don't give value to landscaping. I may give some type of value to maybe if it has something built in, but landscaping is so subjective in a sense. But it's a good question, but it's one of those things that's basically done for your own enjoyment and won't give you much value. Yeah.
What about fruit producing trees, like avocado trees?
That's above, well, fruit producing trees, that's, if you're talking about a farm, that's above me. That's a different level license. A fruit producing tree, what makes things like that complicated? It goes back to, how's it listed? You know, are you going to know that another property had an avocado tree? Because that's not going to be something that's relatively listed. There's no search for avocado tree in MLS. So trees, I typically wouldn't either, but I can see why someone would want to buy a house with an avocado tree. But
What about
feel
what
free.
about like a really bad yard, like no grass, like torn up? Would that have anything to do with the appraisal?
Not too much, not too much, because and the cost to cure on that typically isn't that big. I mean, to install grass, it's not a huge factor. I mean, unless there's like holes where it says health or safety issue, I wouldn't necessarily say it's going to hurt you one way or the other. There's a lot of homes, for example, like in the Inland Empire, in Corona, things like that, where new construction, it was an option to install like grass, and some people just have backyards with nothing in them. It's just dirt. it doesn't hurt the value. But yeah, that's more of an appeal thing that somebody would look at. But yeah, not too much of a value thing. All right. Anyone else? Robert?
Very good. So
All right.
everybody do me a favor, unmute yourselves, give this man a round of applause for taking time out of his day.
Thanks, you guys.
Greatly appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Richard.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
Very much.
you.
Hey, Richard.
Hey, listen, and
Thank you.
if you
Fantastic.
guys, if any of you guys work specifically with a lender that you guys are comfortable with, or if I'm not on their panel, ask if I can join it. I'd appreciate it. And yeah, we'll go from there.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thanks. Have a good day.
Can we have
Fantastic.
your
Good stuff.
information?
Absolutely. I'll make sure that Robert gets it to you guys.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. And feel free,
Good.
you know, quite a few of you reach out to me with questions on properties. Feel free to do that. I've spoken at length to a few of you with questions related to your listings, or, you know, appraisal came in low. I'm always willing to take a look for you. And I'll be honest up front. So, all right, guys. Thank you so
That's
much.
all we're looking for.
Have a good afternoon.
Good job. Good job. Good job. All right. Fantastic. That was great. That was a lot of really good stuff there. So now we have a kind of some better ideas. Recency was my big takeaway. Recency, the most recent time frame is better than distance sometimes. So make sure you're looking at that when you're running comps. That's important. I thought that was a biggie. All right, good stuff. All right, everybody. So we got some fun still this afternoon. We got Gonzalo doing open mic, Frank, Caesar, Frank, Miriam, Barry. There's a 4 o'clock slot that's open. So jam-packed stuff. All right, if you need anything from me, let me know. Other than that, let's have a fantastic rest of our day, and let's go make it happen.
Robert, what was his name again?
His name is Richard Alonzo.
Okay, thank you.